We hold these truths to be self-evident. Corporations are not people. Money is not speech. This is not a Christian nation. And the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from this earth. Welcome to Disorderly Conduct.
Welcome to another episode of Disorderly Conduct. My name is Mayhem, or Joey, as many of you know me. I spent 21 years in special operations. Before we go any further, I want to introduce my esteemed colleagues, starting with Fingers.
Hey y'all, I'm Fingers. I'm a 30-year working musician, accountant by day, enthusiastic amateur economist, and concerned citizen.
Hey Jesse.
Guys, it's Jesse. My name's Jesse. That's me. I am IT guy by day and armchair historian by night. Just a concerned citizen trying to fight against fascism in any way I can.
Hey guys, I'm Bobi. I'm an attorney, organizer, and executive director of Money Out of Politics. And if you want a little clarity, context, and a little disruption, you're in the right place.
I love that. And thanks for your guys' introductions. Listen, today I'm very excited. We're going to be talking about a character that really turned the tide of World War II, okay? And the ways in which he did it, and some parallels and some lessons that we can learn. And that person is Jean Moulin. And today's episode, Discipline of Unity Under Occupation, okay? Every successful resistance has the same problem before it has any chance of success. That's fragmentation. We see it today. Jean Moulin understood that before most people have understood like what resistance meant, right? We weren't even tracking what it meant. He knew fragmentation was its key problem. All right, so key points here. He was sent by Charles de Gaulle. Jesse, you want to give us a run through for the audience of who Charles de Gaulle was?
It's important to know like what we're talking about, right? So we're talking about early on in the war, 1940, right? So just for more context, the war kind of officially broke out in Europe in September of the previous year in 39, where Germany starts taking over territory militarily, and England and France are like, not cool. We're declaring war. The next year, in the spring, Germany would advance on France and Belgium. They would outsmart them through the Ardennes forest and take them off guard. Everyone kind of assumed it would be a repeat of World War I. They all thought it was going to be trench warfare. The lines were going to be in northern France as it was before in the First World War. And Hitler and his generals completely surprised the French, surrounded them, pushed them into a town called Dunkirk, where they had to have an emergency evacuation, of which Charles de Gaulle was in charge of those forces. He did stay behind. He didn't go in the initial evacuation, but eventually joined his French forces in fleeing to England around June, I want to say. The reason why that's important is because Germany would go on to conquer France and, Paris and most of France, until the French kind of gave up and really, listen, even though we had the more advanced and larger army, you outmaneuvered us, you outsmarted us, we're going to sign an armistice, basically, and establish a Vichy government in the south. Vichy's were friendly to the Nazis, while the majority of France was under actual Nazi occupation. At that point, Charles de Gaulle had fled to England, and he was openly rejecting the armistice and was saying, no, we need to be resistant. I think this context is important for two reasons. Number one, the French were outsmarted, not defeated necessarily on a fair battle. So I think in the spirit of the French people, they felt as if the fight was not over, right? That they weren't soundly defeated, they were just out tricked. And I think this kind of leads into the populace feeling as if they want to, not to mention that it's a foreign occupation, right? And no one wants to be under occupation. But de Gaulle's escape and his outward vocal resistance to both Nazi occupation and the Vichy surrender to the armistice led him to be a vocal leader for French forces to come. And his tool, his avenue, his conduit, if you will, was the individual we're talking about today, Jean Moulin. That's how you say it, right? Jean Moulin. So yeah, that's the context of what we're talking about. So.
Penny for your thoughts, Fingers.
Yeah, just because I'm not as much of a historian as Jesse is, but this is the Maginot Line, just to geek out on the military tactics for a second. You've got France, Germany was here, And because of the lessons learned in World War One, they said, okay, we're going to build this incredible fortification. It was considered to, at that point in time to be this impregnable line of fortifications. But this is actually idiocy on the part of general staff, because they didn't consider, they were like, oh, Belgium's our ally. We don't have to build defenses there. Not considering that the Nazis would just go through Belgium. And that's exactly what they did. The Nazis swung through Belgium and then down. So it didn't matter that there was this line of fortifications. It's like building a fence on your front yard and not building a side fence. They just walked around the side fence. And all of those defenses, all of the money that had been poured into the Maginot Line was wasted, was useless.
Yeah,
so.
It's also important to note on what you're saying and stress that going through the Ardennes forest was not like a tactic. The Ardennes forest is a dense forest that separates some of the lines between France, Belgium, and Germany. And having sent panzer divisions and infantry through the Ardennes in less than a week was a military tactic that no one saw coming. The French were taken completely by surprise. Fingers was just saying, they outflanked them, they outmaneuvered them, and they pushed them to the sea. It was when the news came out that this happened in less than 3 weeks, I need to say. Side note, by the way, a lot of the German soldiers were taking Pervitin, which was legalized methamphetamine, in order to make sure they could actually fight long battles and long hours, which is why they did this operation so quickly. But yeah, there's some history for you, huh? But yeah, it's when the news came out that the French forces had failed, despite the Maginot Line being a fortification that was built because of this exact reason, it was a shock to the entire world. It gave Hitler a hand up in a power and a maneuver that no one expected, and solidified his role as the German supreme Führer in Germany. So making his image stronger and humiliating France, which at the time, and this is the last thing I'll say because I can go on forever, at the time, France was the largest and most advanced military in Europe at that time, arguably the world. And Germany was not that advanced. Actually, there's estimates as saying that they weren't supposed to enter the war until 1945 by their own estimates. But Hitler was obviously very eager. And so, yeah, that's how it went down.
Okay, so I got to hear from Bobi. I'm so interested as the key resistor in this group. What your thoughts are?
Well, as you saw, I had some technical difficulties. We're talking about obviously World War II, hyped up on Crank. And what was the context? Blitzkrieg?
Sorry. Yeah, no. So this is Jean Moulin, French resistor, and this is, I'm sorry, there's no way I can possibly
And I missed a good part.
summarize this as well as Jesse did, but basically, Nazi invasion of France is successful. Ultimately, forces get pressed. This is the Battle of Dunkirk. They get pressed out, evacuated to England. Charles de Gaulle is one of those people. Jean Moulin is one of his, I'm not going to call him an emissary because that sounds too diplomatic. He's a coordinator. And this is kind of, and I'm so glad you brought it back to this, Bobi, this is our next portion. He's sent by Charles de Gaulle, not as a fighter, but as a coordinator. And he entered a landscape of communist cells, Gaullists, socialists, regional militias, ego-driven leaders who didn't trust each other. And his job was not to command them. It was to align them. And I think this is so important. We see this in a modern context. So for all of us, Jean Moulin was not the loudest. He wasn't the physically strongest, right? He's not some hulking man, but he was organizationally lethal, right? And that, we got to understand how decisive that role is, right? And we have to all understand where we fall in that spectrum of,
Ability,
emotional control versus decisive role, and they all have their place within the resistance. I'm sorry.
Well, I don't think it's even just emotional control, right? I think that engaging in these sorts of activities with other personalities also has a lot to do with your experience and how well you're able to assess the character and body language of other people, tap a baseline on them and understand potential other motives or, engagement with. I just think that it's a lot more, than maybe just what you're born with when you're in those situations.
Agreed. And I'm so glad you brought that up. And this is how we're going to frame this. We're going to go through 4 traits that made Jean Moulin, in his role as a coordinator within the French resistance, factions. I want to say factions because we talk about, and I just want you guys to understand, and I'm going to highlight this for the listeners. We say French resistance. We say that, all these people that were resisting in France, the fact of the matter is the reason we say that is Jean Moulin.
And I promise I
They
didn't know.
started as warring factions that didn't agree, that were all, and parallel guys, where have we seen this, right? We don't agree and we're fighting amongst each other. Like, no, we all have the same kind of men, but not until we work this out, right? That's where they were at. And he came in and made it not about having your name on it, not about ego, but how do we measure success? The first trait is strategic humility. He didn't try to dominate these factions. He let leaders keep their identities while aligning their objectives. Bobi, please go.
Well, I was going to say, I promise, guys, I didn't know we were going to talk about traits when I said what I said. I did not have a hint. But, at the same time, you also have to be able to assess whether or not those other people are going to operate in a manner that is going to be damaging or lethal to you and your cause, or to you and the cause. Because I think, especially in the current organizing circles, like the blue bracelet jokes, there's a reason why, wearing a blue bracelet doesn't make you safe. Number one, because people tuck tail and align themselves with, white supremacy when it's beneficial. But also because if you're not properly educated or willing to be educated or take direction, and you operate from a place of negligence, you get people hurt. We lost Joey now.
I
Struggling.
think organizationally, what strikes me is two things. There's a saying I heard somewhere, I don't know who it's attributed to, this quote, but it says, there's no limit on the things you can accomplish if you don't worry about who gets credit, right? And it's like, if you can set aside, and what I'm hearing is about a ruthless dedication to the task and to the objective, and saying, this is the objective, all the other stuff, from my perspective, all the other stuff is noise. And so everybody that's interested in this objective, let's head in this direction.
Yeah, I want to add a few things to this. I'm not super familiar with Jean Moulin, but as we're learning and I'm reading about him too, I'm realizing a couple things. I'm realizing he was apparently within the administration in France. He was a state representative, which is very interesting. So he was not a military, he was not a soldier. And I think that says there's a couple points I want to make. One, it kind of shows that you don't need to be a soldier to be on the front lines, right? That we're trying to get at, that I think Joe is trying to get at, that we're all trying to kind of weed through and understand and discuss, is that Jean Moulin used the strategies, the skills within his position, within his lane, and use that to his advantage rather than stepping out, doing something that he's not familiar with. He used his position where he was to really be effective. I'm also learning that he stayed behind in France and was initially part of the Vichy government, but disagreed with literally everything, and was an outspoken critic in spaces that were obviously safe. And he would go on to secretly meet apparently de Gaulle in London, which I didn't know. And that's where he was kind of hired to use his statesmanship, if you will, right? His skills and that ability to have the authority to say, hey, we all need to start working together, kind of thing. And that is I think it's interesting to see someone use their career, their lifelong skill and ability, and apply the same principles in a very different arena.
Modern parallel here, and I gotta say this, Bobi, no offense, because I feel like this is going to be a launching pad for your expertise. The modern parallel is, he didn't try to dominate the factions. He let leaders keep their identities. Modern parallel, Max donor race, the unions, the churches, the veteran groups, the tenant organizations, they synchronize actions without branding takeovers. Your thoughts?
So my thoughts are, we've had this conversation a lot, right, about ego and getting something done. And I think that's the right way to go, bro. But I think that those things only work if you are in a thoughtful, respectful partnership where the collective is still the goal is the goal, right? But I'm not going to operate in a manner that puts you at risk, and I expect you to not operate in a manner that puts me at risk. You can be A and I could be B. It don't really matter to me. But if I voice a concern or what have you, I expect you to take it under consideration, under advisement, and to, like I said, move forward in a way that doesn't put me at risk. And I think that's, again, to circle back to modern day organizing, is something sometimes you see happen in certain rings. Like I've said all the time, these rights were they're written in blood. We're trying to avoid that a second time. But, I just think that that's sort of the point here is, you have the potential to really get people killed, especially under a regime like this. You invite scrutiny under the color of law, and then you don't know where it goes. Yeah, just like most of the immigrants they're kidnapping.
So when we talk about him having to kind of walk in and be delicate with these different warring factions, kind of the same way we see that we're doing here today, what do we think about this statement? If you need credit, you're not ready to lead resistance. Jesse?
Well, hold on, I wanted to add something about what Jesse said. That was the first thing I thought, Jesse, about using diplomatic skills and using your own expertise, because everybody has a role. Certainly if I have to learn how to do taxes and Fingers has to learn how to practice law, we're not going to be as efficient as we would if I just stay in my lane and he stays in his. So I think coming from the legislator or whatever and having diplomatic skills, I'll refrain from what I usually say, but I'll absolutely give you Esquire first. Hunniger. Sorry, we were talking about, get more, try more flies with honey than vinegar, and it was a joke from the other day, and how people use that phrase. Sorry, Joey, what was your question? Because that was one that what Jesse said.
So again, we're talking about strategic humility. He didn't try to dominate the factions. He let leaders keep their identities, but he was aligning their objectives. The modern parallel is the mutual aid cell, or MACs, as we lovingly call them, don't erase the unions. They don't erase the churches. They don't erase the veteran groups. They don't erase the tenant organizations that have already been doing this work. They synchronize action without branding takeovers. That's what we're trying to accomplish, right? And so the lesson that we take, and I want to hear your guys' feedback on this specific idea. If you need credit, you're not ready to lead resistance. Jesse, I think it was on you for this.
There's a similar phrase already, right? And it's this: service is beyond you. Service is beneath you, then leadership is beyond you. And I think that most organizations and organizing, or even corporations, operate and have a healthier harmony, if you will, among their employees. So sorry, Jesse.
Also, I love your shirt, Bobby. Bruja. It's hilarious.
I knew you were going to get
it. Joey, what was the question again, though? Sorry.
Yeah, so again, we're talking about the 4 traits. We're still on number 1, strategic humility. Moulin didn't try to dominate factions. He let leaders keep their identity while aligning their objectives. And the modern parallel that I think we see is that, and we want folks to understand, mutual aid cells don't erase the unions or churches or veterans groups or tenant organizations. They synchronize actions without branding takeovers. And I think that's important. So the lesson is, and really where I want to hear your thoughts about all the way through to this idea, if you need credit, you're not ready to lead resistance.
I mean, one thing that really comes to mind when you talk about this is Jean he's a democratic lover at heart. He loves his republic, right? And I think it shows that, like, as a statesman, he understands the individual autonomy of the people he represents and how to coordinate them, kind of thing, right? So he takes that principle and he applies it to the French resistance, where he's like, listen, I've done the representative gig. I understand that, we're not here to eliminate your identity or eliminate your stance, eliminate what you're standing for, but rather coordinate, kind of thing. As you said, he's not a commander, he's a coordinator, which is very different. I think it's a really good way of putting it, because exactly what it was. I do want to make one quick contrast. What's interesting, and it kind of applies to our modern day, is that you have these two idealistic types that are kind of like clashing together, right? You have the Nazi regime, which is seeking to unify and blend all individuals into one class, or different classes of superior and inferior, kind of thing, right? Whereas here you have Jean, who's doing the exact opposite. He's recognizing people's individuality and using their strengths to coordinate together. And I think it's the classic, we all need to be the same culture and heritage versus multiculturalism, kind of like the sprinkles of that and this kind of like, fighting each other. Yeah, I think that's interesting.
And I think even if you evaluate it like in the framework of authoritarianism or fascism, it's like the state over individuality versus, in a liberal society, individual rights, over the collective. Yeah, that's pretty classic matchup.
I mean, it occurs to me, part of this is respect for subject matter expertise, right? Part of it is recognizing what people's skills are and aligning them in a certain direction. But the things that stick with me are more about the failures. If you're not able to do this, like the thing that keeps coming to mind is our experience in Afghanistan, right? Part of the failure was we were trying to align all these different tribes of factions and get them pointed in the same direction. But there were competing agendas and different definitions of success, different definitions of victory that ultimately broke that down. There was not a clear objective of what are we trying to do? Are we trying to oust the Taliban? Are we trying to put in a new government? What are we trying to do? The other thing in terms of what can happen when there's a lack of coordination is, what we learned in the wake of 9/11. So much of this, like different agencies had information on what was coming, but were not sharing that information. There was a lack of coordination, which led to an attack that may have been preventable. I'm not sure that it was. There's obviously all sorts of other nefarious shit that happened in the wake of 9/11, but I think that seems like a fair lesson to learn from that event is about the perils of not having coordination between different organizations, entities, whatever you want to call it, that are nominally aligned in the same direction, but may not actually, because so much of this was territorial, right? FBI doesn't want to share with CIA because they want to maintain their jurisdiction and keep their hands on things because they say our brief is counterterrorism within the US. CIA doesn't want to share their information because they're protecting sources, etc. And, the net result is everybody's staring at their mitt while the ball goes over the fence.
I think it's a clamoring to retain power, right?
Yeah.
And the more you identify with or align with a faction, like a religion, or what have you, the more you try to keep power sort of within that realm. I wonder too if there's like a little bit of an evolutionary component here. Like if you have no identity, I think a lot of people just feel really vulnerable and they start to clinging on to shit.
So that's, and I think that's an important thing to consider. And I think that you guys are kind of around a concept that actually is characteristic number 2, operational discipline under pressure. Okay. This guy, right, Jean Moulin, survived arrest, torture, never once compromised names. And I just want to share with you guys for a second, so you get a picture of who we're talking about here, listener. This is Jean Moulin here. Okay. Now, if you look at this picture, right, and you'll see why this is important. Look what's obscured here. His neck is completely obscured. Most people take these front-facing. We'll get into it in a minute. You guys will understand the significance of that. I'm going to stop sharing this, but I do want you guys to understand who we're talking about. Have a face to the name. If you're like me and you read books, you see this type of thing. Okay, listen. He survived arrest, torture, didn't compromise names. Look, the Nazis were adapting in this time period. They were adapting at astronomical rates. The Blitzkrieg was famous for doing something that militaries had not done, and that was speed. That was this pace that they kept, right? We would call it, I'm a basketball guy, I grew up playing, we would call it full court press, right? Full court press, that's what
Fast break.
did. Yeah. And look, the Nazis adapted, Moulin adapted faster. That's the fact. Because at the end of the day, and I don't want to spoil this for those of you who don't read history, but we're looking at his picture right now, right? And that's as far as I can go without giving it all away, right? Modern parallel. Look, legal resistance. We're doing that. We're trying to find ways where we pass laws. We're doing FOIA work, right? We're doing court challenges. We're having compliance battles, right? And this is so important for you to weigh in on, Bobby. No emotional leaks, no performative outrage. Paper trails win. The state is slower than you think, but only if you don't panic. Bobby, you got to lead this out.
Well, I think a part of that is also anticipation, which you've seen with Project 2025. I don't think a lot of people know this, but when Heritage Foundation, kind of leaked out Project 2025, attorneys across the nation analyzed it for anticipated challenges, which is why you see a lot of these lawsuits come down so quickly, even though they're long, would typically take weeks to draft. And I think that is, the left lost in a lot of ways. But I think anticipating those challenges and be ready, as Joe would say, being ready for a pivot is important. And, I think that includes also situational awareness, and just So understanding who the actors are, how the power structures are, and how you would defeat your opponent, I guess, for lack of better words. I see a lot of, well, no, I won't see a lot, but I do see some people in organizing rings that sort of have an idea, but they don't take the time to flesh out how you deal with it. And um, urgency without discipline, is not really progress, and you tend to put yourself at a disadvantage and miss the mark or waste your time and resources, which, in these situations are pretty precious.
Yeah, I mean, urgency without discipline. Fingers, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I do want to hear everybody's thoughts on that idea.
I was just going to say, I mean, obviously there's a tension between moving quickly and moving too soon, right? It's like if you don't have, I mean, to continue the basketball analogy, if you take a shot before your feet are under you and you have a solid base, that's a bad shot. And you are most likely going to miss. What makes Steph Curry the best shooter of all time is his fundamentals are so dialed into his body that he instinctively knows when his base is set. And he's just, if you watch him biomechanically, no matter what he has just done, whether he's done a step back, he's, navigated through traffic, when he takes that shot, his base is solid. He knows where he's launching from. He's not like, every once in a while, sure, you'll see a crazy shot, right? But if you actually look and analyze tape and look at his body, his fundamentals are perfect. His base is solid. And that's what has to happen if you want to be effective in the real world. It's like all well and good to say, I want to go there. And it's like, cool, but you have to get there first. You can't cut the line. There's no shortcuts. Mm-hmm. And that tension between doing things quickly and doing things correctly, it's like they say, slow is smooth, smooth is fast, right?
I think that circles right back to what you were saying about knowing where your expertise are, like knowing who goes where, and that you can rely on them. And this is even, you hear that, a jack of all trades is an expert in none, or it's something like that. But basically, you can't master it in none, right? Even in the legal profession, you don't practice every kind of law. Like there are some cases where I'll be like, no, that's not my thing. I'm not doing that because I'm ethically obligated to be competent. But also, it's so knowing where people go and knowing what their expertise are and knowing that you can rely on them to handle that role is important, because if you have people that want to fill all the roles, like give tax advice and legal advice and misquote the Constitution, well, then you got a bunch of misled people who are just scrambling around with bad information. And bad information gets people killed.
As they say.
Or just dangerous, right? We see that writ large on the internet every fucking day. People read things, and think that they know better than people who study the field because they read one thing about a vaccine or they read one thing about a disease, and they suddenly think they're an expert because they watched a half-an-hour YouTube video or they read an article, and they don't understand. It's like, you cannot fully understand and place that information in context, to really have knowledge. And when you do that, you're vulnerable to being misled either by yourself or by somebody else. And even if somebody has the purest of motives, they can lead you over a cliff. But you could also fall in with a Pied Piper who's going to lead you in a different direction you don't want to go.
And
so, to tie it back to humility, right? Just to connect dots. That's really like when I want to talk about humility, the place humility plays in here is knowing what you don't fucking know and not trying to pretend like you know what you don't fucking know.
Right. And that's the part, right? Being able to take direction at some point. I mean, my God, how do you, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room, why, if you have something to teach me, or if you can do this better or more efficiently, continuing to do it wrong or inefficiently just because I don't want you to tell me what to do is crazy. I digress.
All lanes on a freeway head the same direction. So you can stay in your own lane and get to the same destination.
And again, it requires the mutual care, concern, in the legal world, right? Do care. I mean, not operating in a way that's negligent because I don't want to hurt you. I mean, I don't want to hurt myself and I don't want to hurt you. And that's how we form a team that can be trusted. And if that's not there, then I always have to watch you. I can't watch the opposition. Or I got to watch both of you, which puts me at a disadvantage as well.
Yeah, so, we just talked about operational discipline under pressure. That's point 2. Point 3 is coordination beats heroics. Coordination beats heroics, okay? Individual sabotage existed before Moulin, okay? National impact existed after. Mutual aid without coordination is charity. I think we've talked about this a little bit, Bobby. Adopt a kid off a tree. That's not mutual aid, that is charity. Coordinated mutual aid becomes infrastructure. And that is something that veteran, intelligent, engaged organizers understand. The lesson is that 1,000 brave people doing different things loses to 50 doing the same thing well. Your thoughts?
I mean, I'd love to jump in on this. Jean would, from what I've learned, he would, again, work within what he knew. He already had a very well-established network prior to the war because of his state representative position. So what he did once the occupation had begun was he reached out to people that he knew. And he started to create an infrastructure. He reached out to teachers. He reached out to individuals within unions. He reached out to civil servants and soldiers that he knew. And he began building coordination. And what's interesting about this is that not only does it give him a network to rely on, to work with, it also establishes legitimacy, right? Like, could we imagine if Jean had just approached random individuals that he assumed were part of resistance and say, hey, let's do some stuff together? First off, I don't know you. Second of all, you could be a spy for the Nazis, right? And what's interesting is that Jean's approach is what you're talking about, Joey, right? This idea that you're approaching it, you have a sense of urgency, but you're approaching it to build infrastructure that's long lasting and effective, coordinated with an actual purpose. And Jean knew how, I think more importantly too, isn't just the infrastructure that he was seeking to build with the tools, individuals that he already knew, but he knew how to properly use them. Right. So instead of, like we had said before, instead of, building this infrastructure with individuals that he knew, like teachers and civil servants and people in unions, and saying, I'm going to command you, rather, we're going to build an infrastructure that's going to coordinate with other individuals. So it provides not just structure and effectiveness, it provides legitimacy when he starts to reach out to the actual resistance groups.
The thing that comes to me is infrastructure described in a non-military or non-resistance context is community, right? That's what we're building. And in terms of making something actual mutual aid as opposed to charity is building relationships between the people involved so that things can become, I want to say two-way, but they're actually multiple-way streets, right? So it's like, it's not so much like, hey, this person is going to give this person so much as this person has this thing or service that this person needs, and this person can do this for somebody else down the way. It's pay it forward, right? Is part of what, builds out mutual aid in terms of, it's community.
No, I'm sorry. I got to interrupt here. I want to bring this parallel, and I don't do this often, paying it forward, right? You just brought that up. You said we pay it forward. What that parallels in what we've been discussing, mutual aid without coordination is charity. Okay. The entire concept of pay it forward is coordination. I'm not just going to give this to you. I'm giving this to you with the expectation that you do something with it, right? That's coordination by itself. Okay. And so what I want to just reiterate again, mutual aid without coordination is charity. We are not here for charity. We are here for mutual aid. And that is what becomes infrastructure. I will shut up. I just needed to make
the other thing I want to touch on really quickly, because Jesse mentioned it and we've kind of been talking about it, about using people's skills and strengths. I'm going to take a brief detour to talk about like somebody who worked in the resistance that y'all have probably heard the name. I don't know if you knew that she was part of the French resistance, but she was an American, Josephine Baker. And she was an entertainer, a singer, dancer. She was famous for being very risque for the time. She moved to France essentially to escape oppression in the U.S. and the kind of racial oppression that she was facing in the U.S. And she had way more success in France, again, because they were more accepting of, her style of performance. But when the Nazis invaded, she was an icon of everything the Nazis were against. She's an African-American woman. She was married to a Jewish man. And she used her position to aid the resistance. So she moved out of Paris, moved to the south of France, but she was still a celebrity, could still move between countries. And she used that to help the resistance. She was being a courier. She was helping to coordinate between different resistance cells, both inside and outside the country. So just the point here is not that, okay, she dropped her career and she went and picked up a weapon and started marching out in the field, which was not what her strengths were, right? She leveraged what she was already doing and what her strengths were and put those things in service of the resistance. And just as a minor parallel, because I think it occurred to me and I think it's valid, Josephine Baker was kind of the Cardi B of her day in terms of performance and risque sexuality or whatever. So
I think that ties into what I was saying earlier. Like it's like your life experience. All skills aren't hard skills. There's all y'all know that there's soft skills and hard skills. I mean, y'all can do some things that basically I wouldn't be efficient at, and so everybody's sort of got a role to play, as I said, and some people are good.
Well, listen, I am so excited to go into this last characteristic, and this is the one I'm most curious about. Characteristic number 4 is counter move anticipation. Gestapo infiltration forced constant reorganization. Cells were structured to fail without collapsing as a whole. We've discussed this several times. I think even in the pre-show discussion that we had, designed to fail without collapsing the whole. Can anybody tell me what that word that we use is representative of that concept?
Decentralized organizing.
Decentralization. Notice for listeners, there's nothing in there about disorganization. What it says, Gestapo infiltration forced constant reorganization. Cells were structured to fail without collapsing the whole. It says nothing about not being coordinated, not having a central leadership structure. Decentralization simply means that you are compartmentalized, right? And if you think about it, especially in the context of the United States, we are the biggest, and I'm sorry, I'm going into my operational spiel here. We are the biggest insurgency risk on the planet. Okay. I fought in Iraq. I've been to Iraq 5 times. Okay. We know in virtually every circumstance in this insurgency that we were fighting, who we're fighting, what their motivations are, why. Think about the United States. We are not 64% Shia Muslim. We aren't 64% anything. So when you start looking at bad actors in different directions, this is in the context of some of these things that we're talking about. And here, and we're going to tie this all the way back into counter move anticipation. When you think about what we'd be facing in an insurgency in the United States, sniper shoots civilian. What was their motivation? Okay, well, we got to start, if we don't know who the actor is, we got to start with who the victim is. And then given the diversity that we have in the United States, right? And this is something that is going to play again. You're going to see a clip of what I'm saying down the road because it's that impactful. We have to start with who was this person that was hit. I'm talking about civil war insurgency in the United States. We got to start with who they were. And then we realize that there are at least 4 out of the 250 groups that have a reason to hit this person. This is true lawlessness. People talk about lawlessness all the time, and I'm going to shut up right after this. People talk about lawlessness all the time. Lawlessness is when you don't know how or to whom to apply the fucking law. People talk about lawlessness like everybody could just do whatever they want. That's not lawlessness. That's anarchy, okay? Lawlessness is the situation that I'm describing where you know what's right, you know what's wrong, you know that you're facing a wrong result. But how do you apply the law given the circumstance? That's lawlessness. All right, I'm shutting up.
I want to jump in first because the situation you lay out, we know in real time has just happened, right? Charlie Kirk, right? And your point about like looking at the victim to define who the perpetrator was, we see this already from the right. Their assumption is because Charlie Kirk was such a vocal advocate of the right and all of the right wing stuff, then the person who took him out must have been a leftist, even though the person they arrested is not at all a leftist. Like he's further right, like he's Nick Fuentes right? Which also illustrates the danger of factions that are misaligned, right? So if looking on the right here, and you've got these factions are not pointing at a same goal, they've got differing objectives and different agendas, and they see people who are mostly ideologically aligned with them, and none of this should be inferred as support for those people. I hope you listeners are smart enough to understand that's not the point that I'm making. I am just trying to take the lesson of factions who are mostly ideologically aligned, but their agendas are not the end result. Their agendas are to compete for influence, power. I'm going back to the topic, to see who gets credit, and infighting erupts, So I can't tie that back to lawlessness necessarily, but I mean, as soon as you gave that example of somebody being shot by a sniper, that's obviously the first thing that jumps to mind for me, especially the topic of looking at the victim to figure out who the perpetrator was.
Yeah, and sorry, this goes back to, and I'll just refocus it, and you guys are welcome to use that counter move anticipation, right? That's this fourth characteristic, counter move anticipation, right? So in the context of counter move anticipation, we're talking about, okay, what are we counter inferring from the victim, right? And then we got to try to figure out who's doing what.
Jesse, did you want to jump in or no?
Yeah, so I guess when it comes to the decentralization part, I mean, it's the only thing I was thinking about is that it's what makes something pretty effective. And to Finger's point, I don't think he's giving credit to, the Groypers and the far right. I think he's just at least acknowledging the effectiveness of that tactic, right? I'm assuming Fingers is what you meant.
Yeah, just saying that those factions, whether they be Groypers and TP USA or whatever, they are competing for influence over the right. They are competing for different flavors of the same ice cream, which is a weird metaphor, but
So as far as what Joey's talking about anticipating counter moves, I think part of it is anticipating alliances, right? Because when Hitler ultimately took power, you saw parties on the right sort of consolidate under them, which you see right now. I mean, there are at least three different sort of factions, if you will, architecting the coup of the United States government. And I think they're kind of like, hey, we'll throw our eggs in together, and we get. I think towards the end, if they get towards the end of their objective, they're gonna start looking at each other like, who's gonna draw first? And so,
well, that's the lesson from revolutions writ large, right? Is that if you've looked at the history of revolutions generally, as they do approach the end game, then those different factions turn on each other because, like, okay, we've gotten rid of the common enemy. Now we're gonna, attack each other to try to like see who the final boss is. It's like,
right.
What was that game? Squid Game,
Yeah, but it is kind as we've seen, I think it's been fairly successful throughout history.
Yeah. I mean, looking at the current administration, right, we can see the major factions that are aligned, right? We've got the billionaires. We've got, the Zuckerbergs and Musks of the world who just want to destroy the regulatory state, to give them more freedom of action, to get taxes away from them, just to give themselves more freedom of action to play like the petty despots that they want to be. You've got the religious right. You've got the Christian nationalists and their agenda to build a Christian ethno-state. So, theocratic ethno-state, in this country. Then you've got the Peter Thiel guys, the techno-feudalists, right, who think that this is the opportunity to replace government with machines, and that is going to give them maximal leverage over society, and then it's going to basically allow them to become the monarchs mediated by technology. That technology is going to be the thing that allows them to exert control and dominion over the rest of us. And obviously those three agendas are not perfectly aligned with each other, but at this moment they're all, each of them is using Trump as a convenient stalking horse for their own agenda, and using him as the useful idiot to be the face of these things, even as they have competing agendas underneath. And we see this stuff playing out, right? Connect dots with conversations we've had, like talking about flock license plate readers. That is an aspect of the explosive expansion of the surveillance state. And that surveillance state, that fits into the Peter Thiel techno-feudalist vision of things. It fits with the Christian nationalists because then they can keep tabs on anybody who's not Christian or is not in favor of having an all vanilla society. And I'll stop there.
And it's just, it advances the objective for the time being. Yeah, I always talk about what's happening right now. And I'm like, this is what white people think in this country is that, they've basically these three groups have tapped into like the racial resentment of, the dethroned white man, if you will. And they think this is the rise of the South, but like on surveillance state steroids. And we don't understand what really that includes. Like he was talking about lawlessness, and I'm like, I have a 2-year-old, so can you imagine? I don't think a lot of people really are imagining what things could be like, and like people talk about the Holocaust, like that happened, genocides happen. Humans are brutal. It could happen again. Like, how do you navigate a lawless state with a baby you can't shut up? I mean, like you know what I mean? Like this is, I mean, my God, how about you don't try to overthrow our Constitution?
I mean, one thing you said earlier, Bobby, that I thought was really good. You said wrong information kills people. It does. I think. I mean, this is a side note. This is just a me thing. This is why I hate conspiracy so much, because I would make the argument that almost every single massacre and atrocity and genocide in human history is based on conspiracy. Right. So the conspiracy of the Holocaust, the Jews obviously are to blame for World War I, World War II, the woes of the Germans, the Rwanda genocide, that the Tutsis were taking over the government and going to oppress the Hutus. I mean, Darfur, the Uyghurs. I mean, pick a genocide, and I can tell you the actual conspiracy, right? So yeah, I think you're spot on with that.
Which is why we say, guys, pick up a fucking book.
Yeah.
Because it's easy to think everything is a conspiracy when you don't know how shit works.
So connection that real quick. A connection that I hadn't considered before that just like popped into my mind is the parallel between the lost cause narrative in this country about the South and the story that Hitler told the Germans about the Jews betraying them in World War I, that they didn't lose World War I, that it was a betrayal rather than an actual repudiation and defeat of the country as a whole. Like the parallels with the lost cause narrative, I don't know why I haven't seen that before.
So, hey, listen, I'm going to go through some of these quick points on the backside, right? I think this was a great discussion. We hit those 4 characteristics. Let's talk about where it becomes actionable real quick in another 4 points. Fragment recognition. Name competing factions without shaming them. Okay. We can understand who our competitors are without shame and acknowledge ideological differences openly. Moulin didn't pretend communists and conservatives suddenly agreed, right? He made disagreement irrelevant to the fucking mission. That's what he did. And I can't say that enough. Thoughts, 30 seconds each.
I think a big part of that has to be keeping cells that are so ideologically different, pointing in the same direction but without trying to merge them together, right? Because inevitably, if you're trying to put all these people in the same room all the time, inevitably sidebar conversations are going to erupt and they're just going to lose focus on whose ideology is better, where a certain amount of separation and the coordination between them says, hey, these guys are going in these direction. Let's get these guys going in the same direction. And what he's not doing is saying, let's all become one, right? And that also feeds into what you were talking about earlier about resistance and the cells being designed to fail. So, hey, these guys get taken out. These guys can continue on.
Bobby?
I think for that to be successful, you have to have a tightly aligned mission. You can have some disagreement, right? But both of these groups have to have their eyes dead set on the goal. And then, like I said earlier, operate with mutual care, concern, and respect.
Yeah, no, real quick, 30 seconds on fragment recognition. Name competing factions without shaming them. Acknowledge ideological differences openly. And the frame was that Moulin didn't pretend that communists and conservatives suddenly agreed. He just made disagreement irrelevant to the mission. No more than 30 seconds on that.
Yeah, so I guess the real thing that we're all trying to get at is there must be a common denominator amongst all of them. Amongst all the groups that are vying for an objective, there must be a common unifying denominator. And I think when I look at the first current political landscape, this is kind of what the left and the Democratic Party have to do. They have to, and I keep going back to this. I think narrative is so important. I think a lot of people really, really underplay narrative. It's like, oh, it's just a story. People live their lives based on stories. That's how we do it, right? And I think what needs to happen, what Jean was so successful in doing, even if he didn't know he was doing this, was to provide a narrative that the Nazis are the main enemy and that we must unify despite our differences in order to defeat them, kind of thing, right? And I think when it comes to the current political landscape, we need to take a page out of this book in finding a common narrative, something we can all agree on.
I think you see it on both sides, right? You see the othering. Like, so I think you have you know, well, for both World War II, actually, most of these where democracies are sort of toppled, you have some certain economic conditions and suffering that are there, and then you take othering, right, and you bind that. That becomes the glue that drives that sort of, like the Nazis, etc. So they have somebody to blame. It's unifying. Groupthink takes place, and then on the other side, I think fighting against authoritarians is. They definitely need to build the narrative, but I think a lot of it is going to fall on education, because I don't need you to tell me a story to know that I would like to vote and not be shackled to a bed, getting like hands me till. You know what I mean? My individual rights, my autonomy, that's enough for me to move forward in this situation. But I don't think that a lot of our population has a really deep understanding of just how, sort of on the edge we are. Like, we're like in a movie when the bus like almost runs off a bridge and it's like hinging. Like, everybody move to the back together, and like if a couple people just don't think the bridge is gonna fucking fall or the
Yeah,
bus.
I guess the only thing I would say to clarify is when I say narrative, I don't even mean a story. I mean, national narrative is how individuals and how a nation defines itself. And with that definition, where they move, right? I would argue every major piece of legislation has had a narrative behind it. Every president who has pushed said legislation has had a narrative behind it. FDR does it. Abraham Lincoln did it. Lyndon B. Johnson does it. The thing that I'm thinking now, and even MAGA does it. MAGA creates a narrative that redefines American citizenship and America itself based on a very selective, exclusive definition. And I think the answer for the Democrats, for the left, is to provide a successful counter narrative that's not just a story per se, but it realigns American identity based on real American principles that people can be like, okay, I can get behind that, right? Like, maybe I'm a far leftist and I don't agree with half the stuff the Democratic Party does, but at least I agree that there needs to be democratic institutes, kind of thing,
So
Right.
I gotta transition directly to phase 2 when we talk about practical application, because Bobby, I gotta hear you on this, and fingers you as well. Minimum shared objectives, right? We started here a little earlier. I don't know if it was prior to the show. Not ideology, not identity, outcomes, right? Example: anti-corruption enforcement, election transparency, mutual aid delivery, legal defense funds. This aligns perfectly with MAC logic, but again, core concept, not ideology, not identity, outcomes. Your thoughts?
I actually want to hit very quickly, like to emphasize Jesse's point about narrative from a minute ago, which is the U.S. essentially conquered the world with narrative, right? It's like, yes, we're the biggest military force, but the thing that has allowed us to wield cultural hegemony for the last half century is the story of America. That's why immigrants come here, is because they buy the story, right? And they believe the story. They come here and like they buy off on the idea, oh, you can come to the U.S. and there's no limit to what you can achieve. And, that's why, as the point was been made before, Jesse, that, immigrants are entrepreneurs at higher rates than native born Americans, because they've bought this narrative. You can come here and be anything that you want to be. And that narrative becomes so strong that it's hard to get Americans to look at the atrocities we've committed over the centuries and understand that we still have a lot of work to do to aspire to our national ideals. I believe in that story. I think that's the right story that we want. We want to make that story as real as possible. And now, to your point, Jesse, people are trying to evolve a counter narrative that says, actually, America is actually these heritage Americans. That actually America is only the people who are descended from these people who came here 100 years ago and who defeated that carved out an America from the wilderness, which if you break it down and think about that, that's explicitly saying that America is colonization and colonizers.
And I think what stands out to me when we're talking about this, I mean, what they're trying to do, right, is create cohesion and obedience. And I always think about that. I prefer someone who wraps themselves in the Constitution rather than somebody who wraps himself in the flag. Because at the end of the day, you can call yourself American, you got a flag on and all the good stuff, but the principles and protections and ideals laid out in our founding document is what is American, right? People always kill me, I'm like, if you really respect the founders, then read what they wrote and stop trying to tamper with it because you're scared of brown people.
Yeah.
Or somebody's convinced you to be scared of brown people because somehow, they've convinced you that somebody speaking Spanish at the cash register is hurting you or is affecting you in some manner. The majority of people you have this conversation with can't really articulate any way they're affected by a lot of these things. I mean, they'll go towards like amorphous concepts or something like, well, they're spending, they're spending all the money. The government's paying for them. And we know that's not true, right? They're not getting Medicaid. The majority of these people are not getting any benefits and they're paying in taxes. And, that I think that sort of wraps into the narrative, being able to educate people on objective facts in a way that they can receive it and it doesn't like alienate them and push them further to the side.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, circling back though, narrative feeds into this, what the common outcome is, right? And defining what the outcome should be, right? The major ideological strains in American politics now, which all condense down to MAGA and non-MAGA, is the objective a white supremacist theocracy, or is the objective a polytheistic, diverse, vibrant country that has lots of different communities that interact, have their own identity, but are all committed to this common dream and the common narrative of what America is? And just if anybody wants clarification on that, there's a giant fucking statue in New York Harbor.
And also, if you rip the Constitution up to get to your end objective, that's no longer America. It just simply isn't.
Yeah, I want to just touch on this real quick because I was having a debate with somebody. They were saying there is an America without the Constitution. And the argument that I had made was the Constitution is the accumulation of prior generations of thinking and sentiment culminating in the fruit of what would become the Constitution, right? All the stuff of freedom of religion, all the things of, taxation without representation, all the stuff was decades. This was in the making since like 1492 kind of thing. The idea, or not 14, at least 1605.
1215.
Thank you. But this idea that, right, this had been brewing for a long time, at least within the American continent, in that the Constitution is a reflection of what was. It is the ultimate crescendo, if you will, of everything that was brewing. So if you take away the Constitution, you are effectively destroying America, right? Because it's
a founding document. I mean, that's what it is. If I go and incorporate an LLC and then I go dissolve it, it doesn't exist anymore. I can still get Mel in its name and whatever, but it's no longer a legal entity. It's like it's no longer the United States of America if you don't abide by the amendment process. You just, I tell people all the time, like, if you won't stand up for other people because you got whatever issues, stand up for yourself because it's the collective defense of rights. Because they are rights on paper, they're paid for in blood, but if it could be their blood, it could be yours. I mean, like if I don't protect yours, I don't have any.
Okay, I want to jump in because there's an idea, like something that snapped into focus for me recently. If you advocate for and protect the most marginalized parts of society, you're protecting everybody, right? If you try to say the weakest people, the people who are currently under attack, if I fend off those attacks and I establish them and extend protection to them, then I'm covered because I was further from the front line. So I'm protecting myself by defending them. Whereas if I don't defend them, the front line only gets closer to me, which is another way of restating the old first they came for the union workers, right? But it's just in terms of how to, and I'm trying to tie this all together with the idea of a common objective, outcomes, not ideology. Like if you can just focus upon, I want to protect the most marginalized parts of society. and build a society that looks out for them, because that society is going to be more vibrant, it is going to be more resilient, and it is going to be better for all of us. The problem is a lot of people who are far away from the front lines say there's not a war happening, right? Which we get to do in the US. We are at war at other parts of the globe, but because we are insulated from that, we don't have to look at that. We don't have to think about why. We don't have to think about what objectives are being achieved, what the agendas are. And the same thing happens in terms of cultural war and resistance within the US. If you're comfortably isolated to where you don't feel like, well, why should I care about them? Not understanding that in so doing, you're giving away your own rights. You're eroding your own protections.
Right. And that's, again, I was talking about the education part because I think there's sort of two prongs here. I think the objective is you make the government abide by the limitations placed on it in the in the Constitution, so that they don't violate our inalienable rights. That's non-negotiable for everybody. That's the floor. That's the baseline. Now, whether or not we implement different benefits, food stamps, Medicaid, what have you. I mean, yeah, okay, we're going to have a debate on the congressional floor. But at that point, we're standing on the same floor, like there's an understanding, and me and you are the people, and that's the government. And especially, I know Jesse can touch on, tyranny and centralized power and all the things that they thought so hard on, that they opined on, and a lot of letters, guys, that you could read. These were carefully thought out protections that are meant to retain the rights of the people so that they can consent. The power flows up in this nation. And so if you start negotiating those things, there's just you're in quicksand, Today it's me, tomorrow it's you, now you have a poem, and there's a Holocaust.
The irony of the number of people who will say government is too big and it's gotten out of control and we want smaller government, and then without missing a beat, cheer on all of these executive orders. It's just like the cognitive dissonance is just mind-boggling.
Right. I want small government when it comes to dumping, toxic waste in my backyard, but I want to tell you how to have sex and what kind of medicine you can take.
I just think it's like, I want small government, but I want this president to have whatever power he wants.
Right.
It's like,
I want the whole thing to be him. Just him.
Yeah.
Like, oh, okay, that's not what we're doing here.
Yeah, so we talked about minimum shared objectives, not ideology, not identity, not outcomes. Phase 3, distributed action and central coordination, local autonomy. This is what decentralization truly is. Local autonomy, shared timelines, messaging discipline, and escalation ladders, right? There has to be some common structure, no chaos, no vibes, no freelancing. Your thoughts there as a phase 4?
I think it's what we've been saying all along, right? It's like, there are synergies between these ideas. If you're going to try to get people pointed towards the same outcome without getting into ideological fights, there has to be a degree of separation and decentralization, right? Because if you want to get communists and Gaullists marching in the same direction, you can't okay, let's get everybody into one big army and start marching, because fights are going to break out in the ranks. Instead, you're going to say, you guys go in this direction, we're going to come from this route, but we're going to converge on this particular... I'm mixing up my military metaphors here, but you get where I'm going, right? Is that part of this decentralization is part of what allows you to organize and coordinate different cells and get them heading in the same direction, because you're not asking them to change their identity. You're not asking them to submerge themselves into a larger whole. Now, I'm getting very nervous as these words come out of my face, because they're starting to sound like J.D. Vance talking about it.
That's true though, right? It's strategic discipline. It's easier to be a cohesive unit. I'm sure Joey can touch on all of that. And, you form trust with these people. And then, so it's just sort of easier to operate in a cohesive manner.
Yeah. To close off my thought, I just realized what's different between what I'm saying and J.D. Vance. I'm talking about getting all these people moving in the same direction. J.D. Vance is saying, get rid of these people. These are the only ones that count. I feel better now.
We appreciate your clarification.
Me too. Mostly so I can sleep tonight.
And look, here's the thing, all right? And this is, I think, the most important and last phase to discuss. That phase is resilience under suppression. Okay. Look, expect infiltration. How many times have we seen bad actors? I think we've discussed it even this week within some of the spaces that we share. What's this person getting at, right? Are they trying to help or hurt? We've already had those. Expect bad faith actors. Expect infiltrators. Expect pressure. I'm sorry. Expect pressure campaigns. Look, just be impervious to that shit, if I may say. I don't worry about it. If you come in and you try and pressure me, and here's the thing, I know myself, and I know this about Jesse, and I know this about Ron, and I know this about Bobby. Like, there's no point where I'm concerned that thought has not been put into it. And that's for me the essence of trust, right? I know if you say, I think maybe you should look at this a little harder. My immediate thought is, maybe I missed something. Because these are some smart, grounded, helpful, wonderful people. And I think that has to be one of our measures. So resilience under suppression. The reason I bring that specific thing up and I tie all of you guys to the relationship that I have with you all and the way that I feel about you all, this is where Moulin's sacrifice matters the most. This is where it matters the most. He died under torture in 1943. He did not live to see liberation. Fought hard. The only reason that actually occurred, didn't live to see it.
I mean, the thing that jumps out to me, or that I think about, is, especially in the context of modern resistance, is like, you cannot push back against an authoritarian regime for free. There's going to be a cost. And so, no King's Marches is all good. It's all cool. But parades are not protests. Protests are an inherent threat of force against the regime. Parades are parades. And when things are safe, when people feel like I can keep my day job and I can keep everything about my life completely protected and not risk any of that, and I'm resisting.
Everyone wants to save the world, but no one wants to die, right?
Yeah. And
or as we like to say in the military, everybody want to be a gangster, but don't nobody want to do gangster shit. Listen,
and I mean, come on, Joey. I can't believe you didn't pitch this to me first.
No, hold on. Before we get into this, I do want to make this very important clarification. What No Kings and what these folks are doing when they organize these massive demonstrations, first and foremost, is bringing attention to everything that, even in terms of numbers, right? They're bringing attention to the fact that there are this many people that are fucking pissed.
It's the collective revocation of consent.
Revocation of consent to be governed. The entire point is, though, and I think from my perspective here, man, dude, this is a big opportunity for us, right? Like this specific group, this is a big opportunity, right? Because we don't have to break the law, but certainly when it's all said and done, we want to make it easy to go against anybody that's threatening our constitutional rights. So that's the point of building the fucking network that I think we need to build. Sorry.
Well, I just want to add on to what Ron's talking about, because I've heard a lot of critiques of these things, and they talk about, well, there's no demands, this and that, and at some point that's going to be a very valid critique, or if it stagnates and nobody's doing anything. But you're right, parades are not marches. I mean, are not protests, and it really pisses me off sometimes when you see food trucks and they're out there having a dance party. And I mean, I guess if initially that's how you got to get some of these folks involved, but it's disrespectful to history, and I think it undercuts the value, right, in the collective revocation of consent. Because if they think you're just having a dance party, like you said, it's no threat to the power structures, and there's, so you're not really doing much, and that's sort of when we talk about working to tear down oppressive power structures as white people, if it just continues operating and you're like, no, don't do that. You're not
Yeah.
really ready, you're not willing to put any skin in the game, then you're not really, are you really looking to tear down any oppressive? Do you really
No,
care? And
Yeah.
I have to push back on this right now.
if I
I
could
hear this
finish.
often. Well, okay, I'm sorry.
No, take it away, Joseph.
Yeah, go ahead. I mean, yeah. Let me make one comment, and then it may soothe your conscience or your concerns a little bit, man. When I say what I'm saying, I don't mean to discount No Kings and throw it out as not something as useful. What I'm talking about is remaining clear-eyed about the effectiveness of something and what the purpose of something should be. I think No Kings, right, it's about getting people to recognize and getting a bunch of people to say, we do not consent. However, we need to know that there's going to be a next step. The Selma bus boycott took 18 months.
It builds the pressure
You have to influence.
and connects
Yeah. Go
people.
ahead, Bobby. Sorry.
No, it builds pressure to get. It builds the will to go to the next levels when you want. So
That's exactly.
strategically, you can't argue. I'm not strategically. Historically, you can't argue the value of a protest and march. So it just it begins with a collective sort of, like I said, I'm pissed off. People start talking to each other, start evaluating power structures and how they operate and what needs to change or what have you, how you change them. And then, so it just builds the pressure to the next level. And, we obviously have history to tell us what that is, but I don't think that they're not valuable. And I've heard people on TikTok, what's one more march going to do? And I was like, well, what's your suggestion? You sit on your ass at home? Well, I don't know. I'm just like, is this the most effective way? And I'm like, well, you're the one asking the question. Do you have any fucking ideas? No?
No,
And I guess we'll
but
try
this is
the way we've done it before.
precisely the point that I've been making. Let's not talk timelines, all right? But the point that I'm making is that understand what each of these phases does for the overarching goal, right? We're getting millions of people in the same spot at the same time. At a minimum, that gives us the information that we need. You're interested and you'll show up, right? When we start doing more or less or more skilled things or less skilled things, we break this group of people into a useful network of people. This idea that, it's not going to do anything. Well, you know what? With that attitude, you're absolutely fucking right. It won't do anything, right? What you do is you go there and you develop it. You gather the data that you need. You get people doing what they're supposed to be doing or what they want to do or just adjacent. Sometimes that's even enough, right? But my point is, I want to dispel this rumor that in order to be effective, we have to be aggressive. In order to be effective, we have to have answers that we don't necessarily have to be effective. I think there's value in this conversation. I think we get this conversation wrong often. And this is not coming from a place anywhere other than, kind of being in person with it, doing this in other countries, right? Doing unconventional warfare in other countries. I think I've seen this consistently. I don't want us as a group to make this mistake.
10 people to the GSUS group just in No Kings Day 2.0. They just had a sign that said strike. And I was like, are you in the Discord? Would you like to be? And they're like, what? And I was like, yeah, you didn't know there's a national push for a general strike. And that's sort of just the organic collaboration when you're in these spaces, especially when you have a big ass sign that just says, this is what I want. Go ahead, Jeff.
One thing I just want to sprinkle in there is I see conviction the way I see empathy. You can't really teach empathy. You can't really teach conviction. You kind of just have to develop it somehow internally, right? And what I mean by that is these movements, the resistance in France, resistance during other wars or other parts of the world during that time, come from a place of conviction, right? This is why Jean didn't go in commanding, but coordinating, right? And I think at its core, like Bobby, you were saying earlier, like people saying, "Oh, what's another protest going to do?" Those people lack conviction, right? They lack conviction. It's just something that you can't really teach them. They just have to be put in the situation where they're like, "Oh shit, I got to do something about this," right? And then the conviction kind of sets in the same way empathy works, right? And I think the job here isn't to teach conviction, isn't to coordinate with people and convince them. It's to send a message that sparks the conviction in the individuals that have that conviction to organize, to be ready to mobilize, right? Because the issue is if you hire or galvanize someone without conviction, it will fall apart because it's not coming from a place of internal. It's not coming from conviction. It's coming because you told me to. And when I get tired or I get annoyed or I get chastised or I get persecuted or I get arrested or I get legal fees, why am I doing this? Because I'm doing it for you and not for me. But if it's based on conviction, like Jean, it doesn't matter if I'm under occupation. It doesn't matter if I'm tortured. I'm not going to give up any information. I'm not going to acquiesce. I'm not going to surrender because it comes from a place of conviction.
Fucking church, Jesse. And that's why we are still unable to win wars in certain parts of the world, because we're not fighting for the same things. I mean, that's just, honestly, that's a wrap, guys. No, I'm just playing. But I do
Yeah.
have to go get my daughter shit.
Yeah. So to connect some dots, right? Again, part of what I'm trying to say is that like parades or protests, events like No Kings are not the end goal, right? They're a milestone along the way. That's the point that I was trying to make. I didn't mean to shit on the whole thing.
No. And I agree with you.
And
You need to educate yourself and pay due respects.
so, and I think the value that they show, to everybody's point here, is demonstrating how many people feel this way, right? And to the point about conviction, it can build courage, like we've talked before about courage being contagious, just like cowardice is. And so for the people who are convicted enough to say, you know what, I'll risk my job by going on strike. You know, I will risk, financial impacts upon my life. But for them, it gives them an extra measure of conviction and courage to say, and I know this many people are behind me, even if not every single person takes these same actions, right? And connecting back, though, this is why we talk about mutual aid cells. This is why we talk about building out that resilient infrastructure to allow people to go to the next level. We talk about creating food banks and local resources that allow people to go on strike, that allow people to take the next action, which is a stronger signal to the administration and actually starts to inflict some damage on the administration, and not the administration, but the corporate state in general. If you stop, you drop tools and the economy comes to a stop, then nobody's, it's not really going to work for anybody. So that's the point that I was trying to make, and
Yeah, and especially when you're talking about economic actions, you have to start with a base of mutual aid, because if you don't, then you're operating from a place of negligence. Negligence, you're just going to kill people, right? You're going to starve children. We're going to come out homeless, and the strike collapses. Like that is what has happened for that, or our whole episode on how the government will just murder you.
And, again, Selma bus boycott took 18 months, and the city of Selma was almost brought to its knees economically because they depended a lot on transport, bus revenue to finance the city. And so that's why it was effective at the end of the day, because of, they had them over a barrel. But it took intention, it took conviction, it took commitment to continue to walk for 18 months.
And trust, right, among the community members, because it's like, it's like an interrogation. Who's going to tell on who first? Or who's going to go back to work first? Who's going to fold? And so you have to trust that person is really sort of in the fight with you.
Yeah.
And if they're out there with, funny colored hats and a boombox and a food truck, I don't know. I'm not sure you're serious.
And I think that it's also part of the point I'm trying to make is to your point about food trucks, boom boxes, and all of that. It diffuses the message, right? Are these people here because they're actually fed up, or are they actually here because it's a good time?
No, I think it's just disrespectful as hell to history. Go have some firewood delivered, guys. Sorry.
Yeah.
I want to say he is a past example of what we need here in the modern age. Someone who understands the importance of unity of action, who is so principled that he would allow himself to be tortured to death for the cause. I can't imagine that type of, as we were just speaking about, conviction. I must say and point out how important it is for us to be honest about these types of things. to tell the truth about what's going on in government. If you're working in a place, if you're seeing something, say something. If you see something, say something. Jean Moulin is a great example of what will be required of people if we don't act now. Eventually, we will be subject to the type of torture that made this man wear a scarf around his neck so the Nazis couldn't identify him. Okay, so let's get ahead of that. Closing thoughts around the room. Love you guys.
I've been taking a lot of airtime, but I'm going to jump in anyway. I mean, honestly, I've kind of like already said it all, right? Which is the necessity to understand that, authoritarian governments or movements do not fall without sacrifice on the part of the people who are resisting. And, power must be taken. Power is never given. Power must be taken. And when these people are trying to take power from the people need to organize, galvanize, gain the conviction to take power back.
Only thing I can really say is, as usual, is why I love history. History is good for not just learning, but for edifying, for examples, for guidance, for character, for conviction. History, I believe history will always lay down the path that one must follow. I think the answer to our future always lies in the history of our past. Always. Either by example, either by following it, or by doing the opposite is what I think it is.
I think you're spot on. One time in the beginning of, well, not the beginning, because obviously we know it began a long time ago, but when Trump was starting this term, I was talking to Joey and we were talking about World War II. And I was like, I can't believe that I'm watching what I'm watching, because between 80 and 90 million people died in World War II between warfare and genocide, disease and starvation, and you know what I mean? Like, did we learn nothing? But then things start coming together and people start coming together, and I'm like, okay, these are the lessons. Without that, now obviously I would never advocate for it, but I was like, basically, like, did we just lose all those people? Was it all for naught? Are people so cowardice that they're just willing to turn their head and let it happen again? Or whatever happens here should, no, we won't make any predictions like that, but you see what I'm saying? I was like, and we were having a conversation and I was like, but then, maybe it puts us in a better position. And so I think, to your point, we've got to heed the lessons of history, and the way that power flows, historic organizing movements. I mean, like I was saying about the marches and being disrespectful to history, because nothing pisses me off more when people come into this space. I saw it on TikTok earlier, middle-aged white lady, and she was like, we're going to do something completely new, guys. And it was like Democratic defense pods. And I was like, did this bitch just call mutual aid? Pardon my French. I said, she wasn't even blonde, And I was like, oh my God, Black Panthers are rolling over in the grave, and then, I've seen a lot of people just sort of adopt this rhetoric, and then they think like, that's it. Like, oh, throw up a bunch of words, rah, rah, and I'm like, I've told you before, like, somebody who has walked the walk is going to know, like, if somebody who's never been through something, or, has these surface level knowledge and you're just throwing out trigger words, if somebody who's been through it is going to know that. And so when you're talking about reinvent the wheel and this and that, and then you promptly try to reinvent the wheel, I'm like, that's weird. It's got to be a circle, to roll. And so I think it's just important to have historic education on methods that were successful, methods that saved lives, right? Things that didn't save lives, that cost lives. And if you don't pay attention to history and you're not willing to take direction and read and pay attention to what's going on around you, you get in this space and you just start hurting people.
As the person on this panel with the most privilege, right? Part of the problems of these things are people that look like me or closely like me stepping up and assuming they're supposed to be the leaders.
Mm-hmm. And that they know everything. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and a lot of this is unexamined, unconstructed, undeconstructed racism, right? Just the inert, intrinsic sense that, oh, I'm supposed to be at the front. I'm supposed to be leading, instead of, there's people that have done this. Like, follow what's been taught before. And also, again, as the most privileged person on this panel, trust me, you are not as experienced in fighting oppression as people of color. You are not as experienced in fighting oppression as people who are marginalized in this country. Show up, sit down, shut the fuck up, listen, and follow their lead, because they're the ones that know what works. They understand where the pain is. They understand where attention needs to be directed. And us coming in kind of like, oh, I'm going to do Star Wars in the real world is not always the way this shit should work. It's trigger to like power what's coming.
Do you understand the amount of joy I'm having right now? Right? I'm listening to my favorite people talk about my favorite things and the way that I most like to hear them talk about it, right? Which is on a panel, right? With differing views and different perspectives. And then I'm sitting in a comfy Stitch chair with Ben & Jerry's chocolate fudge brown. Listen, far be it for me to complain about fucking anything right now. All right? Let me just enjoy my ice cream and you guys carry on.
Well, I think we were wrapping up. That was the point, right?
Yeah.
No, absolutely. I think that's the end.
All right, guys. Pick up a book, find your feet, look out for your neighbors, and know who does what around you.
Look out for the most marginalized. That's the way to be the most effective, to look out for everybody.
And learn your history.
Learn your history. No, and thank you guys so much. If Jean Moulin showed us that unity under pressure is the hardest form of resistance, what are we still refusing to give up that's keeping us fragmented? I'll leave you with that thought. Until we see you guys next week, thank you for joining us for another episode of Disorderly Conduct, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Disorderly Conduct Podcast, a production of the Public Integrity Network. We believe that the first step to taking back our democracy is getting money out of politics. Come find us at moneyoutofpolitics.org and we'll put you to work. In the meantime, get involved in your community. Volunteer at a soup kitchen. Start a rideshare service. Go to school board meetings. Anything you can to make sure this government remembers that their powers derive from the consent of the governed.